Thank you, folks. As the credits roll, and please pay attention to these important credits, I'd like to welcome back the executive producer and co-director of the film, Paula Apsell, who's ran PBS Nova Science Series for 35 years and left to make this film. I'd like to introduce the co-director of the film, Kirk Wolfinger. Kirk Wolfinger is the president of Lone Wolf Media. He took the hat off. He had a Lone Wolf Media hat on before. He's an Emmy and Peabody Award winner and co-director of the film. Avinoam Patt. Avi Patt, thank you so much for being here. He is the inaugural director of NYU's Center for Study of Anti-Semitism and the Maurice Greenberg Professor of Holocaust Studies at NYU's Skirball Department of Hebrew and Judaic Studies. Avi is a scholar on Holocaust and author of many books, including The Jewish Heroes of Warsaw, a key advisor on this film. And finally, Stephen Meed. Stephen, thank you so much. Stephen is a medical doctor, but the son of Vladka and Benjamin Meed, resistance fighter in the Warsaw Ghetto, devoted himself to translating his mother's amazing story, which is called, it's going to come out in a book called On Both Sides of the Wall. He also is a key advisor and participant of this film. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for this important and amazing film. Thank you all for being a part of this conversation as well. Let me start by asking, Paula, you told us a little bit where this came from, but I'd love to hear from everybody else how they got involved with the film.
Oh.
And I'll start with you, Kirk.
I got involved, as Paula mentioned, we did a Nova called Holocaust Escape Tunnel in Lithuania, and it was one of those experiences where I do a lot of films about discovery underwater, on land, and it's one of those films where the day we started, they found the tunnel, which was incredible. We didn't know if it was there. They found it the first day. I had to call Paula and say, you better come over because we actually found the tunnel.
Yeah, all of a sudden he said, Paula, get on a plane. I said, to Lithuania? Where's Lithuania? I had no idea where it was. And I have to say one thing. You know, I always, as executive producer of Nova, I always talked about the moment of discovery. But I actually was never there in all the years. I worked on 700 films. I was never there when anybody discovered anything. So all of a sudden, we're there in Ponary, which is one of the most horrible places in the world, and their electronic equipment yields these fantastic results.
Yeah. So we knew we were onto something good, and we made that film. That film was well received, and after that, we did a couple of other Nova films on other things. I did films for other people. And Richard Freund, rest in peace, wonderful man and the inspiration for this film, said to Paula one day, when she was just ready to retire, you know, Paula, there's a bigger story here. This resistance thing, it really went out a lot, and I think we need to do a film. And Paula, of course, said, Richard, please, I don't need this mishigas. I'll call Kirk. And so we launched on.
I want to play canasta and Marsha.
We interrupted that. So that was how I got involved. And they said, do you want to do this film? And, you know, I always love a good adventure, but this film took us to 5 countries. I can't remember, 350,000 miles we traveled. We interviewed 60 people. We shot 250 rolls of film. We used 150 rolls of archive film. I mean, it was extensive. And even then, when we got done and when we've shown the film to other audiences, they've said, you know, you missed a story. We missed a lot of stories, but we tried to get the ones we could. So
you're saying you've shown this to a Jewish audience before?
Yes, we have.
Avi, how did you get involved?
So, as is this on?
Yeah.
As has been mentioned, Richard Freund, I have to to give credit to Richard, who was my colleague for many years at the University of Hartford. And Richard actually is a scholar of ancient Jewish history, in particular in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I knew he worked with him on projects on the Dead Sea Scrolls. But when we were working together at the University of Hartford, and I'm a scholar of modern Jewish history and Holocaust studies, we began to work together on these projects where Richard could bring the tools of, as you see in the film, archaeology, geophysical archaeology, that would not disturb the subsurface of these sites to do significant, important research, archaeological research, sort of the next frontier, as Richard would describe it, in Holocaust research. And it was incredibly fascinating for me as somebody who had done extensive archival research, work with archival testimony, with Holocaust survivor testimony, with your mother's testimonies as well, to be in the field and to be able to see how the archaeological research could link up with the archival research, with the testimonies that we'd done, with the sites of memory, with the camps that we would visit, the ghettos. So it was incredibly fascinating. And it was really an opportunity for me when I was still at the University of Hartford. And then when we were working on this film, I was already at the University of Connecticut. Now I'm at NYU. But when we were able to go to Warsaw, that was my last trip together with Richard. And it was really amazing, and I'm sad to see that he's not here, and sad to see him in the film. But I think it is really a fitting tribute to his legacy. So, thank you both for your work in creating this film.
I just want to say that the interview that begins the film with Richard talking about, when students ask me about the Holocaust, why didn't they fight back, opens the very beginning of the film. Richard passed away 4 days later. It was an act of absolute fortitude on his part that he knew we needed one last interview with him, and he was absolutely determined to give it to us.
So I'd just like to add one thing apropos of something that Avi said, which was we'd actually planned. I mean, Richard himself is all over this film, but we traveled with a whole group of geoarchaeologists, and we had actually planned. I mean, they were looking at different Holocaust sites with their electronic equipment to find evidence of resistance in those sites, the way that they had found the tunnel in Ponary. And that was certainly our plan. Unfortunately, the Polish government, which was the government before this government, did not agree with our plan. And while surprisingly, it's usually that they won't let us film, that wasn't the problem. They wouldn't let the geoarchaeologists work. For example, in Sobibor, it's never been known or understood what happened to those heroes, those Jewish heroes who rebelled in the camp. Where are their remains? As Rabbi Shudrick says, everyone is entitled to a burial place that's marked, and their burial place has never been marked. They tried very hard, the geoarchaeologists, to find. The idea is that just outside of the camp, the Germans put their remains in a very long underground burial place. And the geoarchaeologists, with their equipment, could have found it, but we were not allowed to do it. We tried, we sort of snuck for a little while, but we couldn't find anything. They did find something very suggestive of it, but science producer that I am, I didn't, and they didn't feel that it was solid enough to present. Maybe someday they'll be able to go back. The geoarchaeologists were not, they wanted to look for more diaries around Crematorium 3. They were not allowed to. So it was very sad, and it was something completely unexpected. And it was part of this idea that the Holocaust was in Poland was not about the Jews. It was about the Poles, and it was only about the Jews because they were Poles.
Let me bring Steve into this. How did they wrangle you in?
Well, I'll start then at the end, which is I got an email and then a call from Paula, and she sold the idea. I had already had the pleasure of working with Avinoam, who has been one of my guides in the process of rewriting my mother's book, which I'll get to that in another paragraph. But and he vouched for it, and I felt, well, anything that Avinoam says is worth doing, I'll participate. Now, the background to all of this is that, as you might have guessed, the son of Benjamin and Lotka Meed, I was sort of born into this. And with really no choice in the matter, but I definitely accepted that part of the responsibility of being their child and the child of the Warsaw Ghetto and the child of Poland was that I continued the responsibility of being a witness to the witnesses. And that first part of it was that from as far back as I can remember, I was always participating in ghetto commemorations and things because that's what my parents did. My mother had started the task of witnessing what had gone on and vouching for it 1945 in first Warsaw, then Lodz, and then in the DP camps, and then in America. She was touring the United States 6 weeks after having arrived in this country in 46. And at that point, she spoke no English, but even so, she was the eyewitness of the struggle. And the idea of Amida was something that she always tried to explain to people over the next 50 years, that there was never a question of resistance. It was a question of understanding what kind of resistance was conceivable for these people. Nobody could imagine at the beginning, as she tells the story of her own father, no one could imagine that the end result of all of this would be that the Jews would be killed, and also there were no arms. Nobody had arms. It wasn't that they had their own set of rifles or whatever at home. It just didn't exist. And the final thing was what my mother described, which was, my mother said, look, we had a history of thousands of years that some terrible Haman came along and tried to kill us. And I won't do the punchline, but the next line is, and they failed. And we only expected that if we can keep ourselves together as Jews throughout this thing, there will be at some point an end to it. My own interest, why am I doing this, is just before I went to medical school, I did the translation in cooperation, or at least at the behest of my mom, sitting at the kitchen table and just going over the book in Yiddish line by line. And when I retired from medicine, I said, I did a terrible translation. She deserved better than this. And so that was a task that I did on retiring from my job.
Nice. I have to say that in some ways, one of the most beautiful forms of resistance is telling the stories. And your mother, everybody here has done their part in telling the stories both after the fact and actually those in the movie that you've captured who made sure that these stories would not be forgotten. I want to jump into this question of that the audience, I guess, keeps asking you. Kirk, you said that some people are saying, "Oh, you missed that story." How did you choose which stories to tell?
Well, that goes even beyond Paula and me. We had this fabulous small coterie of people who did the work, like Yael is here, ReelAbilities. They would do just interview after interview and read and give Paula mostly and myself ideas, and then we would call and we would say, how does this fit together? So it was not an easy process, but it was a lot of digging and a lot of research. And as I said, 5 different countries, we traveled everywhere. But one of the things I want to point out is in this day, as we know, there are enough Holocaust deniers. One of the things we wanted to do is make sure that not only the stories that we found, like, Vladka Meed, and that we could talk to people who knew them, that who would say this is what happened, but if you look at the film, there are many, many instances where we went to places in Poland and Lithuania, and we found the exact spot that somebody described. And we had photographs, and our director of photography, who happens to be my son, he and I would just search for that building, that curb, that we know it's in the picture, and we would try to find it. Because we wanted to be able to say with 100% certainty, oh, this place existed. This is it. This photograph that you see, we've documented it here. And it was a laborious process, and we did a lot of walking around in Warsaw, as Avi knows, but we found those places wherever we could to say, no, it was right here. This is the building.
It's so important. It's amazing how you have to go above and beyond and out of your way to make sure that this can ring true. I mean, I even noticed that in some footage, when you're using archival footage that wasn't of that exact scene, you noted that. You said, this is not the bombing of that crematorium or whatever it was.
And if I can just add, one of the things that impressed me about working with the team is how meticulous they were about their historical research. Every single line that we see in the film, every translation, the dedication to making sure that they got it as accurate as they could. And you can see in the film some of the world's leading historians of the Holocaust who are interviewed in the film to capture all the different representations of the type of resistance and the different examples that I would use in the teaching of my class, and also some that you don't have time to include in the film, but also to expand that notion of how we define resistance and to show the complexity of just how difficult it would have been to organize armed resistance, which makes it all the more so impressive when we see when it did break out.
I mean, to me, the most important part of the film, really, certainly I had no idea there were any rebellions in camps. I mean, I know that shows my own ignorance, but I would go around to people, and I think most people don't know that either, let alone 6 out of 7. But to me, the part that touches my heart is really this Amidah, this idea that when people have no weapons, when they really have no way of fighting back, when they know that if they shoot or somehow hurt a German soldier, 100 people, 200 people, 2,000 people will be killed. So it becomes a moral question. But this Amidah, this idea that you can resist in a spiritual way, that you can resist by maintaining your culture. You can resist by being kind. You can resist by being a human when the opposition is so inhumane. That, to me, seems very important, and I really always wanted to emphasize that in the film.
Takes me back. It reminds me of that line that's associated, I think it's not true, but associated to no, it wasn't Hemming. In World War I, when they kept the theaters open, in World War II, when they kept the theaters open, and they said, what are we fighting, if not culture, what are we fighting for? And I feel that that's really, in some ways, true even today in all these moments of disaster, of making sure that we keep our culture and our humanity in all of this. I want to ask one more question, then we'll give an opportunity for the audience to ask some questions. So be ready, folks. One of the things I really like about this film is that it's not just about the heroism, and it's not just about the resistance. It actually, in many ways, tells the whole story and goes through kind of the timeline and puts pieces together a lot of the elements of what makes up to be the Holocaust, and it really kind of serves as a document. Why was it important for you to tell this story now? Paula, I'm starting with you. You're looking around.
Yeah, okay, well,
You're close.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I think part of it for me is we had just come off of this film, Holocaust Escape Tunnel, which was a very emotional experience and transformative experience for me. And it really started me questioning how I personally could not know these things, and how, that there must be other examples of resistance. So I think that it was personal experience. But when you look at it kind of distance from my personal experience, the idea of Holocaust denial, the idea of the rise of anti-Semitism, it seems to me that if we can't understand the Holocaust, where so much research has been done, and I have to say, I did not do original research on this film at all. These have been researched by scholars and beautifully, and it just has not reached the general public. So if we can't get that right, what can we get right about now? And it just seems to me with anti-Semitism, with Holocaust denial, we are in a very tough phase for the Jewish people, and I think that makes this all the more important. I think also, just one more thing, is the Claims Conference did a survey in 2018, and they just found this astounding ignorance of the Holocaust, especially among millennials. I can't even, some of the facts are just hair-raising, that they cannot name one ghetto or concentration camp among the thousands that existed, that 20% of millennials and premillennials in New York believe that Jews caused the Holocaust. So I think that there's plenty of reason.
Did you want to? I can.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kirk. You go.
Well, I'm not Jewish, to begin with. So you might ask, what's a nice goy like me doing in a crowd like this? I have been influenced throughout my career, both in the theater and in films, by many Jewish mentors and friends. But above all, I'm a storyteller. And after Holocaust Escape Tunnel, and the realization that people were not accepting the fact that, oh yeah, this is real, this really happened, I was as much driven by wanting to tell the story as I was about, the tragedy and the events. That was all obvious to me. It was, how do you tell this story so that people will believe it?
If I can just add two notes. One of the things that I find incredibly poignant when watching the film, so here we are, almost 80 years after the end of the war, we're marking International Holocaust Remembrance Day, or this week, with the viewing of the film. And we know that we are the last generation that will live amongst the eyewitnesses to the Holocaust. And one of the things that I find incredibly poignant in the film, and I have to applaud you, that the children of survivors, so you have some survivors who were children during the war who you interview in the film, but children like Stephen and the son of Jack Kagan and the son of Abba Kovner and Bella Chazan and so on and so forth. It's really quite striking to see the children tell the stories of their parents and the ways in which memory is transferred from one generation to the next, but the obligation that the children feel to make sure that their parents' stories are still told. And to your point about living in a world where we are surrounded by rampant, it's not the information age, it's the disinformation age, the misinformation age. And we have to do this work, this hard work of education. We have to teach about the history of the Holocaust. We have to teach this history. We have to create works like this that are factually evidence-based, that document this history. To be able to get into Poland when you were able to get in, to do the documentation that you did, to get to Latvia, to get to Lithuania, right? We don't know how much longer we're going to be able to document this in these places and tell these stories, right? So it's incredibly, incredibly important to do this now and to make sure that we continue to educate our young people and that visual media, right? It's, It's easier than reading, I think, in many respects. But if they learn that way, I'm fine with it, right? I would much rather they watch a documentary film that's evidence-based than that they learn that way than not at all.
Stephen.
Just want to add something to what Avi has just touched on. And that is, I want to just express a tremendous gratitude to your entire team. I was thinking of who wrote that text so eloquently and simply. Who chose the pictures, who, all the pieces that go into having something that tells a broad story in a way that people can absorb it. You got a lot of information and you didn't flood, either flood the picture, flood the camera, flood the audience that they could take away from it a key message and secondary points that were important. So thank you.
Thank you. We have time for a few questions. I see one all the way up on top, if we could start from there. Sorry, Juliet.
I'm running. Thank you. Hopefully, 3 really quick questions. One, was it a conscious effort to not talk about how, like, the B and Arbeit macht frei is upside down and stuff like that, as also forms of resistance? 2, the son of the courier, that he couldn't articulate one of his mother's stories, was that ever shared off camera, or maybe it just didn't make it into the final cut? And 3, can you say the plans for your book being released again? Sorry, thanks.
Okay, so let me answer the one before that, because I don't know what the answer is for that son at that time. But I was so glad that you respected the fact of allowing him to say, I can't tell you, with dignity, and didn't have to go further. So that's just my comment on that. The book itself is, they say that by the end of this year, it will be published in its new form. And what I've tried to do personally, I already had the book in a translation, is to achieve some little bit of the same kind of thing. Make the story make sense, be attractive and understandable to a generation which is already 80 years and more removed from it.
I'll just add maybe we'll go this way this time. I'll add a couple of notes. One thing, just to build on what you said about sort of the challenge of telling a parent's story, and you can see the depth of the emotion. And I'm curious to hear sort of, well, you'll explain sort of the decision of how that shot worked. But to your point, I want to add something about Vladka's story that I think is so important. And I'm so glad that you're republishing the book, because one of the things that Stephen noted, when Vladka arrived here in New York in the summer of 1946, immediately, so you can go into the Yiddish Vorwärts, and actually the Jewish National Library has digitized a huge collection of the Jewish press. You can go to the July 1st, 1946 issue of the Vorwärts, the Yiddish Vorwärts, and you can see a story about Vladka. Who was Vladka, the Yiddish Heldin von Warsaw Ghetto, the Vladka, the Jewish heroine of the Warsaw Ghetto. And then there's a series that she writes basically for the next 5 months or so. Vladka erzählt. Vladka tells her story. So I want to point this out because there's often this myth that the survivors didn't talk. And we have exactly a case here of Vladka telling her story as soon as she got here. And there was an audience for this. People wanted to hear the story of Vladka. They wanted to hear about this heroic courier who smuggled arms in and out of the ghetto. They wanted to hear about what happened in the Warsaw Ghetto. And then it's published in Yiddish in 1948. But it's so incredibly important that first it's then translated into English in your first version, and now it's going to be translated again. Because in every generation, right, we have an obligation to tell and retell, and we know that people don't know these stories. Just to the first point, you mentioned sort of the idea of the upside down B like an Arbeit macht frei. And I'm glad you bring this up because there are many, many examples like this of, let's call it defiance, right? Of different acts of Jewish defiance throughout the Nazi period. one of my colleagues who's a historian at USC, Wolf Gruner, has a book that's coming out this year called Resistors, and he expands upon Yehuda Bauer's definition of Amidah, as Bauer defines as any group action taken in opposition to known or surmised German laws. And Wolf expands it to say we have to look at any individual action, right? All these acts of defiance we have to document. They are significant because it shows this determination to maintain the spirit, to say you will not break us. And I just want to say that will, that determination to say we will maintain our solidarity, we will maintain our cohesion as a group. You're trying to destroy and atomize our society, and we will stick together. That's the only way that armed resistance then is able to emerge from that situation, because people stick together, and we have to understand how defiance enables that to happen as well.
Yeah, the story that Yoel told and had no ending. No, I don't know. And I don't care to know. I think it was just as powerful, more so, that it spoke in the silence that he couldn't even finish the sentence.
Yeah, well, I do know the story because he told me it later, and it's so horrible. I mean, everything that happened during the Holocaust is horrible. This is so frightening that you won't sleep tonight, so I'm not going to tell you. I'd like to, Isaac, if I could, say one thing, because I won't be able to sleep tonight if I don't say it. This place, the JCC, is really a showcase for independent film, and I think that's just fantastic. And I think it's fantastic to show Holocaust films, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard in distributing this film. And remember, I never distributed anything because I had one distributor, that was PBS. I didn't know how lucky I was. And I hear, oh, another Holocaust film. And, you know, that really makes me very sad, because this is how we remember. But films like this are not made without a lot of support. I have 60 contributors for this film in amounts ranging from $25 to $250,000. And I am grateful for every single one. I mentioned some names at the beginning, but of course I forgot some. And I just want to say, my dear friend Melanie Wallace, who's on the board of Leading Edge Productions and has supported me throughout this whole film, and also my family, Greg and Michelle Singer, and my daughter, Natalie Apsell, and our whole family got together and contributed. And it's all of these, no matter how big or how small, that make a film possible. And I can't tell you how grateful I am, because there would be no resistance they fought back if it weren't for these people. And that's really how I knew that the story was powerful, because it wasn't actually that hard to raise the money, because the story is so powerful that it told itself and it worked its way into people's hearts.
Let's take one last question over here. I'm sorry, I know there are a lot of hands up.
I think it's important, and this is a great story. I'm a second generation, and Avi, I'm from the Hartford area, so we'll connect later. But
Play geography later.
yeah, and kudos to that, doing the Ponar story, because I have relatives that were murdered there. But where's the distribution afterwards to the kids? You're at NYU now. It's a hotbed of anti-Semitism. That's what's going on. So what are the next steps? And how could civilians like us get involved with that?
Well, right now it's going to film festivals. There seems to be some kind of order in this thing, which I never knew about before. But something very important to me is younger audiences. And I have already shown the film at to a few colleges and to high schools. And I feel like it's so important that they understand that these Holocaust resistors, Vladka and Bella, they were their age, these kids' age. And I'm trying to use that as a way to get to their brains and to their hearts, to understand what it must have taken and to put themselves in their place and to think about a lot of these important questions. So just distributing it so that kids and young people will see it, that's a really important goal. It is not easy, but it's a very important goal.
Is there a website where people can find out more about the film?
Yes, theyfoughtback.com. Very simple.
Grab it while you can. I want to thank you all so much for being a part of this conversation. Thank you, folks, for joining us. Please spread the word, and we look forward to seeing you at other screenings. Have a good night.